Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody. I'm really thrilled to be joined by Nissa Rhee. She is an award-winning journalist in a city that still boasts of great journalism. Here in Chicago, we have traditional newspapers and broadcast news. We have a deep complement of new and innovative news organizations. Great reporting happens everywhere. And Nissa's own work, for example, revealed the sort of shocking life expectancy gap across the city that led to some important work in healthcare in this city. And she's now the executive director of Borderless magazine, which is a nonprofit news organization that focuses on that, issue that no one's ever heard of in America, immigration, and immigration in the Midwest. It's really important. Nissa, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. That was a really kind open and a deep cut there with the life expectancy story. I think that was almost a decade ago now.
Yes, but I was involved in a lot of things in the city at the time, including working with some hospitals on some healthcare issues, and the reporting made a difference. I mean, it launched a big effort here.
Yeah, and I mean, it's sad in some ways that the city is still dealing with these same issues, but I'm so glad that my reporting was able to shine some light on the work of people who are doing work to change that and to improve life expectancies in the city.
Yeah. Well, let's say you're a good journalist. You really are. And I want to talk to you about Borderless. So tell us about it.
Yeah.
Tell everybody about it. It's a fascinating and important new enough entry into the journalism world.
Sure. So I've been a journalist for about 20 years now. Grew up in the Chicago suburbs, got my start at Chicago Public Radio on the Worldview show, if you all remember that. And then spent some time as a foreign correspondent in Asia, and then moved back to Chicago with my husband. And at the time, I was covering a lot of criminal justice and health issues in the city, and immigration kept popping up as kind of a through line. That's something that we were covering a lot of the gun violence issues. We did a decent amount of reporting, on education and other beats in the city, but immigration I kept seeing again and again it not getting the coverage it deserves. So 1 in 3 Chicago families have an immigrant family member. There's about 1.7 million immigrants in the Chicagoland area. It's a huge part of our population. It's a huge part of my own family. And, as someone who is an immigrant living in Asia, I could see it from both sides. And so I was really curious about these issues. And then when President Trump was elected the first time, and, one of the first things he did was enact the Muslim travel ban. So this was late January, 8 years ago. And like many people, I was in shock that, something so blatantly racist, so blatantly anti-Islam could become law in our country. And I wondered as a journalist what I could do about it. And I really looked around and saw, again, a lack of coverage and just how ill-prepared we were as a city to report on these issues. Like I said, I've been a journalist for 2 decades. I've seen the number of news outlets go down a lot. I've seen the number of reporters and editors go down a lot. It's only 3 in 10 journalists are working in journalism still after 20 years. So we've lost 70% of our industry in the country. So we've had a lot of shrinking. This isn't news to anyone. But what the impact of that has been is there's so many stories that are not being covered, so many communities that are being left out. And, also, from a linguistic side, 1 in 3 families speak Spanish at home. Very few of our local news outlets are publishing in Spanish or reporting in Spanish. So I saw a big opportunity in this wake of a really devastating piece of executive order in law that came about. So myself and two other journalists at the time decided to do something about it. We created what was initially a blog to report on the individuals impacted by the Muslim travel ban in Chicago. And that grew and grew and eventually became a 501c3 nonprofit. And we really started with $0, zero anything, and we've grown to a staff of 10 today. And we're publishing still and really centering immigrants in our stories and publishing everything in English and Spanish. So we've grown a lot in almost 9 years from that moment of the Muslim travel ban.
Yeah. And immigration is, of course, not just an issue. It's the lived experience of millions. And you found a way to get reporters who are living that experience, who understand the communities, who are part of the communities they write about, which is one of the reasons why their writing is so lovely.
Yeah, so on staff, our staff is mostly made up of immigrants and family members of immigrants. Over 90% of our stories are reported or photographed by people from immigrant communities. It's really been a superpower. So, our staff speaks Vietnamese, Mandarin, Thai, Spanish, of course, and many other languages, and that allows us to access stories that other places simply can't get. But it also provides a kind of context because people are very familiar with culture and how different people live in different spaces. And so it's been really incredible to see everyone flourish, and for us to give these opportunities for young journalists to come into a newsroom like ours, get those skills, see other reporters and editors that look like them, have similar family histories as them, and then they go on to get amazing jobs at Washington Post or NPR or NBC, and they're changing the industry too. So it's been really interesting.
Dive in a little bit more. You have one of the things you do. You have a training of young journalists program. Right? Just talk a little bit about that, because you are changing the landscape of journalism.
Yeah, so our mission as a nonprofit, and we are nonpartisan as well, is to reimagine immigration journalism for a more just and equitable future. So we're really focused on not just reporting stories and providing information, which is, of course, like a very, very important part of what we do. But we really want to change how these stories are told in a big way. And so one of our programs beyond the reporting is called Pathways. And it's one of only 2 programs in the United States that offers these paid opportunities for emerging journalists from immigrant communities to get experience in the newsroom, work as an intern, work as a fellow, and really have a kind of 360 mentorship process as well to get those skills that will allow them to find a job in this really competitive environment, competitive industry. Mm-hmm. And, my background, I've been a journalist, but I've also taught journalism in the college level. So on the personal level, I love doing that too, and just pouring into the next generation.
And, one of my really 40-year-long friends, I know a friend of your organization, Tracy Bain, has been working very hard to help figure out ways for new news organizations to stand on their own 2 feet with sort of wraparound services or shared services. I mean, to innovate in the business of journalism is very difficult these days, and I know you're part of that.
Yes. I mean, that's been really interesting, becoming an entrepreneur after, my background is in the editorial, the reporting side. Yep. So when I started Borderless with 2 partners, I didn't know anything about the business. I had to learn how to do accounting, how to, raise money, how to do everything. And so it's been a really exciting time in journalism, despite all of the attacks on journalists every day. And this year has been very difficult. I've been meeting with lawyers constantly to address threats to our reporters, to address threats to our newsroom. And despite all that, there is a lot of optimism and hope in people who believe that journalism is still important. And, people like Tracy Bain are trying to gather those folks together and find ways to preserve and, reinvent in many ways the industry that we all love so much. And that's, the only industry that's part of our Constitution that is a very, important part of what it means to be American is to have a free press. And so what does that look like today? I think we're all trying to answer that in our own newsrooms.
Yeah, it's really important, these experiments that are going on right now. Nissa, are you able or comfortable saying more about why you're spending all this time with lawyers and why your reporters are being threatened?
Yes, of course. I think it's a lot of different things. I had no idea there were this many kind of lawyers until this year. So some of it, we're in a kind of unique spot as Borderless. We're a nonprofit. There have been a lot of threats to 501c3s at this moment. There's been a lot of conversations about what happens if the federal government decides to pull someone's 501c3 status, and what would that look like for funding? Could we have any funding? So thinking through those things and working with our board to make sure we are really secure and safe from that point. I think there's also the immigration side. A lot of immigration-related and immigrant-serving organizations are seeing federal threats at this moment, but they're also seeing heightened hate speech, heightened messages. We get a lot more messages on our email and social media now that are just really nasty. And some of that is just social media, but some of it gets very personal, attacking our specific reporters, for example. We've had people just show up at our office unannounced. We have had to really think through, what does digital safety look like? What does physical safety look like? For the first time in my 20 years, I've had to, purchase gas masks and goggles and use protective gear for our reporters and make sure that they all know how to use it. All of our team carries personal alarms now. We're really just having to think through things like what happens if we get a subpoena? How do we protect the contact on, the information on people's phones and computers? And I think where this gets a little extra challenging for Borderless is because of, our superpower that so much of our staff are either immigrants or family members of immigrants. It puts us in an extra vulnerable situation where I wouldn't want, one of my reporters' phones to be subpoenaed. That information includes information about perhaps an undocumented family member, which gets to the federal government. So it's thinking through a lot of these different things. I think the other part is reporting, it's one thing for an ICE officer or a police officer to harass a journalist, when they're out reporting on these issues. It's another, it's like just heightened risk when an ICE agent or a police officer harasses an immigrant reporter. And, we've seen ICE has picked up immigrant reporters now and is threatening to deport them. And so that's a lot of the protections that are ingrained in law and also just culturally to protect journalists doing their work have been thrown out the window in this administration.
You say all that. What you just told me is so frightening and horrifying, and you said it so calmly, dispassionately. It's got to be terrifying in the newsroom. It's got to. I know it also gets your blood flowing. It gets you determined to do the job as opposed to back down. But it also just the cost of of doing this in Chicago in the last couple months, where ICE and Customs and Border Patrol have been so provocatively aggressive in our city, has got to have been, I think, imagine, even if you've been a foreign correspondent, one of the most difficult experiences you've ever had.
It has. And I mean, I covered the Black Lives Matter protests here in Chicago, as you know, when I was a reporter working with the Christian Science Monitor. And this is at a scale that's so far beyond that. It has been kind of shocking. I will say, you know, earlier this year, I kind of made a realization that the only way for us to be safe, excuse me, is to quit and go move to a cabin in the woods, because there is no safe under this administration if we want to do the work that we want to do. You know, in order for us to be impactful and to do justice by the immigrant communities we serve, by the Chicagoans we serve, we really have to put ourselves out there in a way that is uncomfortable and, exactly as you said, it's scary. And so it's really having to sit with that fear, but also lean on people and figure out, you know, like I said, talk to lawyers, talk to other people. What are the things we can do to mitigate these risks? Mm-hmm. We're never going to be able to take them away. But, you know, even things like planning now, we have plans. What happens if one of our journalists is arrested or is taken to the hospital? Like, what is the steps we're going to take? Who are we going to call? So it is a very unusual, scary moment, but I am also very grateful for everyone who has stepped up to support us at this moment.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about it, because I think Chicago has been fantastic, and Chicagoans have been wonderful through this terrible crisis. You're part of a community of journalists that includes, you know, local TV reporters and reporters at old legacy newspapers like the one I used to run. You know, and I think the journalists have, you know, I know that it's a competitive industry, but I think you guys have all worked together remarkably well in taking care of each other in remarkable ways during this crisis.
Yes, I mean, there's something special about Chicago, and I mean, I'm very biased. I've lived a lot of places in the world, but the only place in the U.S. I've lived is Cook County, so I'm Cook County through and through. And I think, too, when I talk to journalists or friends in other parts of the country, they really admire what we do here as a city. And this goes way beyond journalism. It goes to our organizing roots, to how people show up on the streets, to our politicians, you know, standing up for people. We really fight back in a way that you don't really see in LA or some of these other places that got similar or, you know, challenges related to ICE coming. Even during COVID, this was something that was very unique about us, the number of mutual aid groups that popped up to feed people. That was not something that you saw in other cities. So there's something about the way we care for each other in this city, and that there's just a shared agreement. You don't mess with Chicago. Don't mess with us, because we will bring it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's been my thoughts, not at the very beginning, but when I saw Chicagoans rise to the occasion, to not just the well-meaning, but the well-organized way journalists work together, the spontaneous ways residents poured out of their houses every time they knew ICE was coming, the eagerness to blow the whistle to alert people that they were coming, the desire to go spend money in immigrant neighborhoods to try and help out because of the economic impact of all of this that's happened all over this city, protecting kids after school or taking kids trick-or-treating, just what we were doing. This led me to think that Chicago is Donald Trump's Waterloo, that this is where he's declared he's gonna break this city or we're going to break him. And and I don't know, like Napoleon in Moscow, right? The winter has come and he's fled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I think part of what we're seeing, I mean, in some ways, I'm not surprised the way Chicagoans have really stood up. And, you look at, the ICE Center in the suburbs, you look at other places where people are protesting every day. And, people are showing up. But, they tried to break us a couple of years ago with sending all the buses to Chicago. And that was very challenging for the city, and there were a lot of very understandable complaints Chicagoans had about how the city of Chicago handled the buses and the migrants and the housing. And, Borderless wrote a series of investigations on the poor way the city handled the housing of migrants in, a former factory in Pilsen where a little boy died. Mm-hmm. And despite all of that, despite the battering that we took with the buses and that situation, people are still willing to step up for their neighbors, even if it's a neighbor who came here more recently. So I think that's something very special. And I think the other thing that's, special is Borderless, like I said, we started with $0. I was working multiple jobs for years while we were trying to get this off the ground. And now we have a staff, but we are still a nonprofit, and we are run completely by donations. We don't get any government funding. And we have seen people donate to us more. We have seen foundations, there's a lot of foundations in Chicago step up and support these kind of stories, this kind of reporting more. Right now we're doing our end of year campaign. Every donation to Borderless gets doubled. And we have seen so many donations come in, and people write in, when they're putting their donation online, they leave a little note, and those have really kept our team going. Hearing what people's, their words of encouragement, keep doing this, because, we're just at the start. There's 3 more years of this. So we really need to make sure that we're equipped, that we can serve our Chicago community the way they deserve for the future as well as today.
For those of you who are listening, it's Borderless Mag, borderlessmag.org. And I encourage you to just look at the site, look at the stories, read, just look at the kinds of stories that are reported and read some of them because they're authentic in a way that has often been very hard for journalists to get to in covering communities that they weren't part of. It just seems obvious. But when you see it done right, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, thank you. I think that really drives our coverage. We don't want to just repeat whatever politician or Trump is saying. Really talk about who are immigrants for their stories.
Pretend it's journalism?
Yes, we do not do that. That is not our perspective. There's plenty of places you can get that. That is not Borderless.
Unfortunately, yeah. Okay, so do you have of your most recent stories? Is there one that that really struck you that you would want to share with us?
I think there's one that. Yes, that really kind of stood out to me, and that was we followed up on, this father was killed near O'Hare Airport, Silverio, and there was a lot of coverage when it happened. But then everyone kind of disappeared. And the people in Franklin Park, the suburb, and Silverio's family, they had to still sit with that loss and the trauma of having this really violent incident. He was pulled over by ICE and then shot and killed by them, 38-year-old father, too.
Yeah.
At daycare, yes.
Yeah.
And, I'm a mother. Any stories like this, really kill me. But it was such a violent and horrific incident. And, it did get a lot of coverage, which was really good to see. I do think news outlets have stepped up in this moment to cover immigration. But like I said, kind of like the aftermath was missed. So our reporter, Ida, went, and actually it was a team of Ida and a couple of our photojournalists, went back to Franklin Park again and again to learn more and to hear how people are living and sitting with that grief, because I think that's something, even when ICE leaves and things maybe go back to, quote, normal, people are going to be sitting with that trauma and the grief and having witnessed or experienced the violence. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a good story, and I thank you for picking that one to talk to us about. So right now, you guys reach, I don't know, not quite 250,000 people a month online, and they're not all in Chicago. Are you thinking of, while you're stressed and meeting payroll and doing all those things a startup does, are you also thinking of expansion?
We are, yes. I think, we've seen the number of people outside of Illinois. Our audience has really grown over the last few years, especially with Trump. There's a hunger for this kind of reporting, so definitely interested in expanding beyond Chicago as we grow.
Yep. All right, so tell people, if they feel like it, how they can make a contribution.
Yes, the easiest way is to go to our website. That's borderlessmag.org again. And there's just a donate button in the top right you can click, and then it's easy from there. And every donation between now and the end of the year is doubled.
Oh, that's good. It's nice to have a donor who's going to do that for you. Yep.
Yes.
Well, I really appreciate your time and your work. I know it's really been beyond stressful these last few months, not just from the how do we keep up and do the business perspective, but from the how do we cope with the violence from the government, the hate that's been unleashed by the politics of the moment. And you're doing it, and you're providing a great service, great service.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you check out Borderless Magazine.